Hello, Adult Sunday School leader. I hope you're staying warm today. When I'm recording this, it's January the 15th. That's a Monday. It's cold outside. It's probably somewhere in the 10 to 15 degree area. It got down to about 10 or so last night. Got a little bit of sleet, a little bit of snow, just enough to the roads are covered and everything's closed around here, including our church office. Schools are closed, be closed today and tomorrow. Anyway, I hope you're staying warm, and I hope maybe you might be taking this chance, if you're staying at home, to get a jump on this week's Sunday School lesson. Well, our lesson this week, it occurs on what we in Southern Baptist circles call the Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. It's always this time of year, and you know why that is? Well, it's because it's near the anniversary of the Roe versus Wade decision, which of course legalized abortion as a federal right. 11 years later, in 1984, President Reagan designated January 22nd as Sanctity of Human Life Sunday. You're probably aware that the 2022 Supreme Court decision overturned the Roe versus Wade decision. Now, that doesn't mean that abortion is outlawed. It just means that it is no longer a federal right, and it gave the decision back to the states to either curtail it or completely ban it. So our lesson this week, it's a standalone lesson. It's a special focus lesson out of Psalm 10. It's called A Cry for Justice. And the point of the lesson this week is join God in seeking justice, including justice for unborn children. Well, I encourage you to mention abortion, but not to make it just an anti-abortion lesson, because injustice toward the defenseless, it covers a much broader spectrum than aborting the unborn. And I believe that is a cause we need to champion, of course, is the rights of the unborn. But besides, you probably don't know the complete history of everyone in your class. You may have women who have had abortions, or men whose girlfriends or wives have had one, and they've had to live with that every day, especially this time of year, and hear those sermons. So let's be sensitive. Let's not sugarcoat things, but let's be sensitive to that fact as well. Because Ephesians 4:15 says to speak the truth in love. So yes, address the abortion issue, but don't do so out of a judgmental attitude. In fact, I'd encourage you to broaden the lesson to talk about the sanctity of all human life and how all life is precious to God. So what are some ways besides abortion that human life is devalued in our culture today? Well, I think of things like pornography, euthanasia, racism, unconcern for the homeless, human trafficking, and that includes sex trafficking, forced labor, organ trafficking. Those things come to my mind. And I'd encourage you to apply this lesson to all of these areas and make it kind of a broad stroke. So let's now look at that first passage. We're in Psalm chapter 10. This is verses 1 through 4. And when you read these verses, you can sense the psalmist's desperation. He's being gut level honest with God. He's observing the success of the wicked, and he's questioning God as to why he allows this to continue. Does that sound familiar? That's the main question in the book of Ecclesiastes. Why do the wicked prosper and the righteous suffer? Well, this might be a good point to stop and ask the class, why doesn't God just immediately zap wicked people? Why is that? You might ask that question. Well, I think primarily because he's patient, right? He's allowing them time to come to repentance. You might want to look at 2 Peter 3:9 to back that up. Besides, if he zapped every person who committed some evil or arrogant act, who's going to be left? I know I'm not going to be. Okay, so the psalmist lists several qualities and actions that describe these wicked people that he's observing. They're arrogant. They relentlessly pursue people whom they can victimize, almost like a lion waiting to snare its prey. They're boastful about their own cravings, about those desires that they can't even control. And because there isn't an immediate discipline, they don't have the view that God is gracious and patient, but that there is no God. And if there's no God, then there's no accountability. By the way, what does Psalm 14:1 call those who don't believe there is a God? Fools. Okay. So back to that. Their thought is, get what you can from whomever you can without regard to anyone else. Because life is short, and he who dies with the most toys, the most money, with the most status, whatever, wins. Well, these verses show us that it's okay to be honest with God. God can handle our questions and handle those frustrations that we have. We can sometimes feel the same way the psalmist did. Lord, where are you? Why are you allowing children to be kidnapped and sold into both labor and sexual slavery? Why do you allow people who hate others based solely on the color of their skin to even live? Why are they even continuing to live? God, won't you come down and zap these sinners out of existence? And I believe that's what the psalmist felt, because this attitude is reflected in the next set of verses in Psalm 10, verses 12 through 15. And here, the psalmist is no longer bemoaning the fate of the helpless. He's calling for the Lord to rise up and act. Don't forget, don't overlook the oppressed, God. The hands of God, it denotes his power. And so use your power, God, to bring an end to injustice. And again, the writer makes mention that the oppressor does not fear being held accountable. And he continues, God, you're not blind. You've seen what is going on. You've kind of been taking notes, so to speak. The oppressed, the helpless one, they're counting on you for justice. And who are some of the most vulnerable in that ancient society? Of course, it was women and children, especially women and children who didn't have a husband or a father to provide and protect. The writer said that God is a helper to the fatherless, to the vulnerable. And just as the hand of God denotes his power, the arm of the wicked has a similar meaning. The psalmist wants God to break any power. It says break his arm. I don't think that's a literal thing. I think that's a figurative way of saying break the power that the wicked has, the wicked people that they have, and bring about justice. Now, our last set of verses is Psalm 10, verses 16 through 18, and they finish out the chapter. The writer begins the psalm with, God, are you hiding? Can you not hear the cries of those being abused? But he finishes the psalm with an affirmation that even though that's how the psalmist felt, the reality is that God does hear, and he does defend, and he does encourage. God is indeed king. He is in control. We know that there will be a payday someday, that God will hold people accountable for their actions. But let's make sure that we don't commit the same error that the wicked folks do, okay, and have an arrogant, cocky attitude about it. To me, saying with a sneer, well, they're going to get theirs someday, that's an anti-life attitude. Because by doing that, you're rejoicing in the fact that they will experience an eternity in hell. And I don't think we should be doing that. Let's not do that. Well, shortly after the initial invasion of the Ukraine by Russia, I mentioned in class that we should be praying for the salvation of Vladimir Putin. At that time, I had a person in my class who stated that they could pray for a bullet to Putin's head easier than praying for his salvation. And I couldn't disagree more. I'm sure that there were some of those early Christians who were hoping that Saul of Tarsus, one that was tormenting them, hauling them off for executions, they were hoping that he would befall some terrible fate. But instead, God used him tremendously to spread the gospel. So let's do what we can to fight all types of injustice, realizing that it'll be a fight that will not be over until the end of time. But that shouldn't dissuade us. Instead, let's each do what we can in our own way to expose injustice and to support the most vulnerable in society. Now, to get from this lesson to the abortion issue, if you want to take that jump, think about this. Who in our society is the most defenseless? And I would say it's the unborn child. At least after a child's born, there are relatives, there's government agencies to look out after the welfare of a child, but there's really nothing for the preborn. That raises the question, is the fetus actually a person, or is it just a person in the making? Well, I think we all can agree that all human life is precious to God. It's a gift from God. So when does that life begin? So here's Jim's take on it, okay? Our nation, the United States, it prides itself on giving the benefit of the doubt and to such things as like innocent until proven guilty. Also, we have laws protecting the rights of those in the minority who maybe can't defend themselves as much as maybe other people can, like the American with Disabilities Act, civil rights laws that came about back in the 60s and later. Now, as I stated earlier, to me, the unborn are the most defenseless, and they deserve the benefit of the doubt most of all. Ronald Reagan said this: simple morality dictates that unless and until someone can prove that the unborn human is not alive, we must give it the benefit of the doubt and assume that it is. And thus it should be entitled to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I think most of us, I hope all of us, are appalled when we hear stories of those in China or India, about those people who are murdering babies soon after they're born just because of their gender or because of some physical abnormality. But what if they were killed as they were being born? Well, that's still appalling, isn't it? What about the day before they were born? Or the day before that? Or the day before that? See, how many days back from birth is it okay to terminate the life? Is it when there's kicking, brain waves, or heartbeat? Is that the cutoff point? Or if it's unclear when that group of cells actually is a person, then doesn't it make sense to give that fetus, that unborn, the benefit of the doubt and to say that life begins at conception? So that's my argument, okay? But let's end with an illustration about how we should see all life as precious and needing justice. Let's say you're walking down the street and something on the sidewalk catches your eye. You bend down, you pick up this green wadded piece of paper, and you're not sure what it is, but you carefully unfold it and you realize it's a $20 bill. Now, it's an older style. It's the style that was printed from 1928 through 1990, but it's pretty worn, but you can still tell it's a $20 bill. So into your pocket it goes. So you're walking along, and now you're more alert. Now you're looking for any other money on the ground, and sure enough, there's another bill. And this one's somewhat of a newer style. It's one printed in the 1990s, and it has a couple of tears in it. Of course, you pick it up and you quickly put it in your pocket. And as you continue walking down the street, once again, you spot even another suspicious green paper on the sidewalk. And it turns out to be one that has that enlarged portrait of Andrew Jackson in an oval frame on it. This bill was printed sometime between 1998 and 2003. You scoop it up and notice that someone has scribbled a couple of grocery items on it so they wouldn't forget. But you pocket it, you go on. And just before you get into your car, you look down, you spot one more bill. It's a brand new, crisp bill that looks like it just came out of the ATM. Is this your lucky day or what? So here's the question. How much money did you find that magical day? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 times 20 is 80. $80, right? Of course you found $80. Each bill was worth $20. It didn't matter how old the bill was. It didn't matter how many people had handled it. It didn't matter if it had been on the street for 2 years or if it was fresh out of the ATM. It didn't matter if the bill had been used as part of an illegal purchase or if it had been trampled on. Every bill had the same value because its maker, the United States government, says so. Well, likewise, all people are created in the image of God. It doesn't matter their age, skin color, social status, gender, or what life has thrown them. Everyone has value because their maker says so. Next week, we're back in Luke for 5 weeks. We're going to be looking at yielded faith from Luke 7. It's the story of the centurion servant who was healed. Thank you so much for watching. Hope you're staying warm. Pray for and with your class.